Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief at pharmaphorum. I'm here at CAR-TCR in Boston, and I'm joined by Matt Lakelin, co-founder of TrakCel. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having us, Jonah.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with me today. So tell me a little bit about yourself and about TrakCel. What brings you to the show today?
Okay, well, TrakCel is a software company that provides orchestration software which helps manage advanced therapies. And obviously, CAR-TCR therapies are a cornerstone of the advanced therapy market. Really, some CAR-TCR therapies are leading the charge for advanced therapies, providing curative treatments for not for oncological indications. And so at TrakCel, we help these companies that are developing these products by simplifying the management of their supply chain. And what we're doing at the conference today is really catching up with some old friends, also making some new acquaintances, and also finding out what's really new in the CAR-TCR space at the moment.
So what are some of the headlines of the supply chain challenges in CAR-TCR?
I think for CAR-TCR, the headlines really focus on patient management. What we try to do at TrakCel is think about the patient, which is the most important part of the supply chain. How you manage them, how you manage their drug product to make sure they can be treated as quickly as possible. Because we can look at all the different challenges throughout the supply chain, but ultimately the patient is the most important thing. And so addressing the patient's needs is at the forefront of not just TrakCel's, but I think everyone here at the conference's thoughts.
One thing I keep hearing is that in a field that's exploding so fast, it's growing so fast. There's so many potential bottlenecks from getting the initial materials to having qualified treatment centers that can administer these treatments, and they all have to be worked on before the lion's share of these come through the FDA next year or the year after that. So it really is an interesting time in sort of logistics and manufacturing. How do you sort of enable that scaling and make sure that you're kind of preparing for a future where there's going to be more and more of these therapies?
It's a really interesting question. I think the advantage of speaking to companies like TrakCel is that we're a very mature company. We've been trading for over 10 years. We've managed a variety of different advanced therapies, not just CAR-TCR, but allogeneic therapies, other types of autologous treatments. And you can leverage experience at TrakCel. So we've seen these types of problems in the supply chain before. We've addressed these bottlenecks. And what's really important, not just for orchestration, but for the industry as a whole, to collaborate, because there's a good chance that if you have a problem, other people have solved that problem beforehand. So speak to them, collaborate, and as I said before, we can break down those bottlenecks and get those therapies to patients faster. We are seeing more and more treatments moving through their development cycle towards commercialization. So it's really essential as a community that we come together to address those challenges and really share that experience. There's a lot of companies that have blazed a trail and trodden those paths. Really, we need to share that experience so that we can get those products to patients as quickly as possible.
One of the tracks at the conference is a clinical operations track, and they're talking a lot about the development of these and some of the unique challenges in doing clinical trials in this space. Is that something that you have experience with or you work on?
I think certainly from the challenge around clinical trials is several fold. So again, I go back to my point about the patient. The patient is key here. You've got different types of products being analyzed as opposed to your standard small molecule. So you're starting the process with the patient taking cells from a patient. And you need to think about how you're going to manage the patient through the whole supply chain, through the whole process. A standard small molecule clinical trial, patient would arrive, be enrolled, and you'd be able to take some medication from a shelf and give that to the patient. Whereas in these situations, patient is enrolled and you take cells from a patient, and it may be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months before a patient actually sees their drug product delivered. So that engagement with the patient is important, making sure they understand what's going on and why there is what they see a perceived delay, but actually what's happening is they're making this groundbreaking, life-saving, curative treatment for the patient. So it's all about information, the flow of information, making sure the patient understands what's going on, why we're doing this, and ultimately the benefit to them.
You can't really do a traditional control group or placebo in some of these therapies, right? Or
Absolutely. Really, really, really big challenge. If you think about it, that these CAR-TCR treatments, their primary focus is to treat oncological indications. And for most of the developers of these CAR-TCR treatments, they are treatment of last resort. This means that patients have been subjected to other standards of care, typically chemotherapy, radiotherapy, before they're then enrolled onto CAR-TCR clinical trials. Now, what that basically means is that you can't have a placebo group because it would be unethical to enroll patients who've had other standards of care and not responded. Basically, if you enroll them onto this placebo group, they're actually enrolling them onto a pathway to death because there's no other treatment options for them.
right.
And so we have to focus. Yes, there are no placebo groups, but actually it's fantastic because what we're doing is we've got these treatments that are giving hope to people that didn't have hope before. And so the challenge of not having a placebo group, in my view, it's not actually a challenge. It's actually something that should be celebrated because we are providing chances for life where there weren't chances.
You mentioned the treatment of last resort, and that's one thing I've heard at the show is that that's starting to change. They're starting to experiment with these therapies in early stage patients and finding really incredible results. How do you see that sort of shift happening and playing out?
I think we need to be sensible. We need to have a risk-based approach. Some of the there's some really interesting work at the moment looking at patients that might respond to standard of care versus they might need to have an accelerated pathway towards CAR-TCR treatments. And that's really important because obviously these CAR-TCR treatments at the moment are quite expensive compared to standard of care treatment. So what I would like to see is some more work done on being able to identify patients, being able to identify those that may not respond to standard chemotherapy agents. So their movement towards CAR-TCR treatments can be expedited. But secondly, we've also got to recognize that current standard of care, chemotherapy, is incredibly unpleasant for the individual. These chemotherapy agents actually attack healthy cells and unhealthy cells. There's no discrimination between the two, and that causes some very unpleasant side effects for patients. So maybe as we get more and more data available about the safety of these CAR-TCR treatments, then perhaps they could become frontline therapies, replacing those chemotherapy agents and ultimately improving that patient experience because they're not having those unpleasant side effects that are normally associated with your traditional chemo agents.
What haven't we talked about yet that is interesting or exciting to you in terms of trends in the space or things that you've seen or heard?
For me, something that's really important at the moment is standardization in the industry. And there are a whole raft of different areas within the supply chain and within the industry itself where we can look at standardization. Such things as identifying patients, the way in which we go about doing that. There's no well, up until recently, there was no real sort of standard approach for a chain of identity identifier, for example. And I think ICBA has done some great work on introducing a standard chain of identity number. But really, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a great opportunity for us as an industry to collaborate, to provide standardization throughout the whole delivery cycle for these advanced therapies to make them as simple as possible to manage, as easy as possible to get from manufacturing environments into hospital environments, and also as quick as possible to get them to patients. And that's what's key for us, that collaboration to improve access to these therapies.
Who has to take the lead on that standardization? I mean, is it going to come from governments and regulators, or does it need to come from inside industry, or a little bit of each?
I always think with a question like that, I think it's the JFK quote: "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." So the answer is everyone within the industry needs to take responsibility. We cannot leave it to government agencies, and we cannot leave it to standards bodies. We should be coming together as a group for the good of the patients.
Great. Thank you so much for chatting with me, Matt. Really interesting stuff.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jonah. Thanks very much.